It looked like a normal wedding photo until a closer look at the bride's hand revealed something disturbing. At the Atlanta Historical Archive, afternoon light filled the room as Dr. Rebecca Morrison reviewed a set of early 1900s photographs donated by an unknown estate. Most of the pictures showed formal portraits and gatherings, but one image stopped her. It was a wedding photo from 1903. A white man in a dark suit sat stiffly beside a black woman in a detailed white gown. Their hands were joined in a way that should have shown unity, yet something felt off. After 15 years as an archivist, Rebecca knew how to spot details that did not fit. This picture felt wrong in several ways. In Georgia in 1903, interracial marriage was not only socially rejected, it was against the law. The state had banned such marriages since the 1700s, and the rules were even stricter after the Civil War. People who tried to marry across races could face prison. Yet this photograph seemed to show exactly that. She flagged the image for a high-resolution scan, unable to shake a growing sense of unease. 2 weeks later, while reviewing the digital files, she zoomed in on different parts of the picture. She checked the backdrop, the bride's jewelry, and the groom's stern face. Then she looked at their hands. As the image became clearer, she froze. The bride's fingers were not just resting. They formed a quiet, purposeful sign for help, hidden in plain sight. Rebecca zoomed in further. The position of the woman's fingers showed intention. What looked like a wedding pose was actually a signal for distress. This was not simply an illegal marriage. It hinted at something far more troubling. A silent plea had been sitting unnoticed for 120 years. Rebecca immediately called Dr. Marcus Williams, an expert in African American history and Jim Crow-era records. When he arrived that evening, she showed him a photo without saying a word. His face grew tight as he studied it. "This shouldn't exist," he said at last. He reminded her that Georgia's laws in 1903 made an interracial marriage impossible. Unless what? Rebecca asked, already fearing the truth. "Unless this wasn't a real marriage at all," he said. "This may show coercion or captivity. Look at her expression. She doesn't look like a bride. She looks terrified." They examined every detail for hours. The studio stamp read Morrison and Wright Portrait Studio, Atlanta, Georgia, August 1903. On the back was a faint note. Mr. Charles Whitfield and servant. Not wife, not bride, servant. The word hung in the air. Marcus spoke softly. This photo wasn't meant to show a marriage. It was meant to show control. Rebecca felt sick. Why would she be wearing a wedding dress? Why stage it like this? Marcus researched further. He explained that during this time, some white men used their power over black women in harmful ways. They could not legally marry them, but they could force them into situations that looked like marriage. It was a way to assert control while keeping their public reputation intact. These women had few rights, little protection, and almost no way to resist. That night, Rebecca could not sleep. She kept seeing the woman's face and that hidden signal for help. Who was she? What happened to her? And did anyone at the time notice her plea, or had it gone unseen until now? The next morning, Rebecca and Marcus went to the Georgia State Archives to identify the people in the photograph. Their first lead was the name Charles Whitfield. The archivist on duty, Mrs. Dorothy Hayes, paused when she heard the name. She explained that the Whitfield family had been well known in Atlanta, though not always in a positive way. She returned with several boxes of records. The Whitfields had been prominent from the 1870s to the 1920s and had made their wealth in cotton and textiles. Charles took over the business in 1898. Census records from 1900 showed him living in a large home on Peachtree Street with significant wealth and many servants. The names listed were all black women and girls between the ages of 14 and 30. One name stood out to Rebecca. Louisa, age 16, listed as a domestic worker. Marcus uncovered property documents showing that Whitfield owned several locations around Atlanta, including a textile factory that relied heavily on black women and children who worked long hours for very little pay. Newspapers of the time praised him as a respected employer and community leader, a stark contrast to what the records suggested. They searched for the woman in the photograph. Since the note labeled her only as a servant, Identifying her would be challenging, but Mrs. Hayes had an idea. She suggested checking city records for missing persons or unusual reports around August 1903. Some families tried to report missing daughters, even though help was rarely offered. After 2 days of digging through incomplete records, Marcus found a police report from September 1903. The police report Marcus found was short and dismissive, but it gave him their first solid clue. It stated that Henry and Martha Johnson had reported their daughter, Louisa Johnson, missing. She was 19 and worked in the home of Charles Whitfield. Her family said they had not seen her in more than a month, even though she lived only a couple of miles away. Whitfield told police that Louisa was fine, doing her assigned work and in good health. With no further investigation, the case was closed. Rebecca checked the name against the 1900 census and found Louisa listed there at age 16, living with her parents and 3 younger siblings near Auburn Avenue. Henry worked as a carpenter. Martha worked as a laundress. The family owned their small home and valued education. They were part of a growing black middle class in Atlanta, doing their best to move forward despite harsh laws and limited rights. Marcus uncovered more information. In 1902, Henry had been injured at a construction job and could no longer work. The family soon fell into debt. A church record from early 1903 showed that they had asked for help when their situation worsened. This is where everything changed. Marcus said quietly, Whitfield had seen a family struggling and a young woman with few choices. He likely offered her work and promised steady pay. They then found a letter Martha Johnson had written to her pastor in July 1903. She explained that they had not seen Louisa in 3 weeks. Whitfield said Louisa was busy and doing well, but he would not allow her parents to visit, claiming it would interrupt the house routine. Martha wrote that her daughter always sent weekly letters, and suddenly none had arrived. She described how the other servants would not meet her eyes when she visited the house. She begged the pastor for help. The pastor noted his response in his journal. He had spoken with Whitfield, who insisted Louisa was healthy, content, and simply busy. Whitfield suggested the family should be grateful for the work he provided and not create trouble. The pastor wrote that he believed Whitfield and advised the Johnsons to trust in faith and remain patient. Rebecca then searched for records from a Morrison and Wright portrait studio through the Georgia Historical Society. The studio operated from 1895 to 1910, and some materials have been saved by descendants of the photographers. She reached out to James Morrison, great-grandson of the studio's founder, William Morrison. James invited them to his home in Decatur, where he kept a large archive of his great-grandfather's work. James explained that William Morrison photographed Atlanta's upper class for 15 years. He led them into his study and pulled out an old leather journal from August 1903. Morrison had kept careful notes about his clients and sessions. He also came from a family that valued justice, which caused him personal conflict when documenting difficult moments in Southern history. James opened the journal to a marked page and read aloud an entry from August 17, 1903. William wrote that he had completed one of the hardest assignments of his career that day. Whitfield had requested a wedding portrait, even though no real wedding had taken place. The young black woman with him did not seem to be there by choice. She wore an expensive dress that did not fit correctly, and her eyes showed deep fear. William had nearly refused the job. He wrote that Whitfield insisted on posing with their hands joined. He never used the woman's name, only calling her girl. William noticed bruises on her wrists as he positioned them. When he looked into her eyes to make sure she was facing the camera, he saw clear distress. She seemed to be trying to communicate something, but Whitfield watched her closely. She could not speak freely. James continued reading. William wrote that while preparing the exposure, he saw her fingers shift into a specific, intentional pattern, almost like a signal. He did not comment, but he made sure to capture it in the photograph. Whitfield requested several shots to get the perfect image. After the session, William felt sick. He knew the scene was not a wedding. It was proof of something harmful, but he felt powerless to report it. Authorities would not take concerns against a well-known man like Whitfield seriously. Marcus expanded their research further and uncovered a long pattern of exploitation tied to Whitfield. Through court documents, newspaper archives, and property records, a troubling history appeared. From 1899 to 1905, at least 6 families had filed reports about daughters who went to work for Whitfield and then stopped contacting them. Each case followed the same pattern. A black family under financial strain. A young woman, usually in her late teens, hired as a domestic helper. Letters home that stopped without explanation. Families turned away when they tried to visit. Police reports dismissed without action. In 2 of these cases, the young women eventually returned months later. They refused to talk about what happened and seemed deeply shaken. Rebecca found a statement from a woman named Sarah, who had worked for Whitfield in 1901. She had given her account to a local black community group that recorded experiences of unfair treatment, since official systems did not accept such reports. Sarah explained that she and 2 others were not allowed to leave the house. Whitfield threatened them and their families if they tried. She said he treated them as if they belonged to him, leaving them with no control and nowhere to turn. Sarah's statement went on. She said there had been another girl in the house when she first arrived, no older than 16. The girl was kept in a room on the 3rd floor, and none of the workers were allowed to speak to her. Sarah often heard her crying at night. After a few weeks, the girl vanished. Whitfield claimed she had stolen from him and run away, but Sarah did not believe that. The girl had been too afraid to leave on her own. Sarah said she eventually got out only because her brother threatened to go public if Whitfield refused to release her. Whitfield let her go to avoid attention, but Sarah believed many others did not get that chance. Marcus uncovered evidence that Whitfield had strong ties to local officials. He donated to political campaigns and hosted gatherings for influential people in Atlanta. He was protected on every side, Marcus said quietly. Police dismissed concerns. Courts gave him the benefit of the doubt. Black families had no safe path to protest. Their daughters could disappear, and no one in power stepped in. Even with everything they were learning, Rebecca kept her focus on Louisa. The photo showed more than harm. It showed bravery. The signal in her hand was a choice, a quiet act of resistance. She understood the photo might be the only record, Rebecca said as she studied it again. She made sure to leave a sign. Through letters Martha Johnson sent to churches and community groups, they followed the family's long search for their daughter. In October 1903, Henry Johnson, still recovering from his injury, tried to force his way into Whitfield's house to see Louisa. He was arrested and charged with trespassing and disturbing the peace. Newspapers reported the incident in Whitfield's favor, calling Henry unstable and unreasonable. Martha later wrote to the newly formed NAACP chapter in Atlanta. She said her daughter had been taken against her will and had not been allowed contact with her family for months. She begged for help, explaining that every official channel had failed them because of their race and Whitfield's status. The NAACP attempted to investigate, but they faced the same obstacles. Their attorney, Robert Foster, tried to file a legal request to require Whitfield to present Louisa in court. The judge refused, saying there was no proof of wrongdoing and accusing the family of making up claims against a respected citizen. Foster documented the case, but had to stop for his own safety. Then Marcus found something unexpected. A letter from December 1903 written by a white woman named Eleanor Hartwell, who lived next door to Whitfield. She wrote to her sister in Boston about a young black woman in Whitfield's home. She said the situation seemed troubling and that she had only seen the woman once, looking out from an upstairs window with visible bruising. Eleanor had tried to check on her, but the other workers seemed too scared to let her in. She feared that even if she reported it, no one would take her seriously. Louisa's trail appeared to end in December 1903, and Rebecca feared the worst. But Marcus made another discovery, this time in the records of Freedmen's Hospital in Washington, D.C. In March 1904, a young woman named Louisa had been brought in by members of a mutual aid group who found her near a train station. She had many injuries at different stages of healing and showed clear signs of long-term mistreatment. She spoke very little and was deeply afraid of men, especially white men. She said she had escaped from somewhere in Georgia, but shared few details, repeating only that speaking out could endanger her family. Rebecca read on with rising emotion. The hospital had contacted an organization that supported women escaping unsafe situations. A social worker named Catherine Wells took charge of Louisa's case. Catherine's notes described a young woman who startled at sudden movements and woke from nightmares and a panic. Over several weeks, Louisa slowly shared parts of her experience. Being held in a house, isolated from her family, and threatened whenever she thought of escaping. In April 1904, Catherine recorded Louisa, explaining that she had been confined for 8 months. She said the stage photo in the white dress was the worst moment. Whitfield wanted to create the appearance of a willing partnership, though she had never agreed to any of it. Louisa said she intentionally formed a distress signal with her fingers during the photo, something she had once read about. She hoped someone would someday see it and understand that she had not gone willingly. The record showed that Catherine helped Louisa contact her family through careful, coded letters. In May 1904, Martha Johnson received a message from her daughter. "Mama, I am alive. I can't tell you where I am, only that I am safe now and recovering. The man who held me believes I am gone. Please let him continue to believe that. It is the only way to keep you, father, and my siblings safe. I will write again when I can. I love you." Marcus found the last missing piece in the Atlanta newspaper archives from March 1904. A small article reported a fire at the Whitfield home. It stated that one servant had died and claimed she caused the fire by being careless while cooking. The woman's name was not recorded, and the body was described as too badly burned to identify. Authorities called it a tragic accident, but a black newspaper, the Atlanta Independent, offered a different account. Its careful wording suggested that the young woman Whitfield claimed had died had actually escaped weeks earlier. Several witnesses had seen someone matching her description running from property in February. The article implied the fire had been set intentionally to hide her escape and discourage anyone else from speaking up. Local police chose not to investigate further. That meant Louisa had managed to get away, and Whitfield covered it up by announcing her death. Admitting she escaped would have forced him to reveal the truth about her captivity. To protect his reputation, he created a false story and moved on. Because of that lie, Louisa's family had to act as though she was gone to keep her safe. Rebecca and Marcus uncovered letters between Martha Johnson and Catherine Wells that continued for years. Catherine had helped Louisa start a new life in Washington, D.C., under a different name. Louisa found work as a seamstress, later trained as a nurse, and married a gentleman named Edward, a postal worker, in 1908. They raised 4 children together. Louisa never returned to Atlanta, and her parents had to keep her survival secret. Marcus discovered that Louisa continued sharing her truth privately. In 1925, she gave testimony to a commission studying racial violence and exploitation in the South. She used an alias, but she described her own experience. "I was 19 when a white man took me from my family and held me for 8 months. This could happen because the law offered no protection to someone like me. He knew I would not be believed. He knew my family had no power to help. But I survived. I want my story recorded so that when the world is ready to listen, people will understand what happened to women in my situation." Rebecca and Marcus spent 6 months assembling their research into a full historical record. Through D.C. archives, they identified Louisa's great-granddaughter, Dr. Michelle Foster, who taught African-American history at Howard University. When Rebecca called, Michelle became emotional. "We have been waiting for someone to uncover this," she said. They met at Michelle's home, where she had kept everything Louisa had saved. Michelle explained that her great-grandmother lived until 1978, reaching the age of 94. She never forgot what happened in Atlanta. She shared her story with her family when they were old enough to understand and made them promise to protect it. She always said, "Someday someone will find that photograph, and they need to know the truth." Michelle showed them Louisa's personal papers, including a journal from her later years. One entry read, "I have lived a full life despite what happened to me. I raised 4 wonderful children. I helped bring many babies safely into the world as a nurse. I was loved, and I loved deeply. But I never forgot those 8 months or my parents' pain. Somewhere, a photograph exists with my silent plea captured in it. I hope someone sees it one day and understands." I hope my story helps people recognize how many women suffer quietly, trapped by unjust laws and society that refuse to hear us. The National Museum of African American History and Culture later created an exhibition called Silent Testimony, Louisa's story and the hidden history of Jim Crow captivity. The main display featured a 1903 photograph, along with the photographer's journal, hospital notes, family letters, and Louisa's own testimony. The exhibition text made the truth clear. This was not a wedding portrait, but a record of abuse protected by the laws and customs of the time. At the exhibition opening, Michelle stood before the photograph with tears running down her face. Next to the original image was a picture of Louisa from 1960 at age 76, surrounded by her children and grandchildren, looking peaceful and strong. "My great-grandmother survived," Michelle told the audience. She not only survived, she rose above what was meant to break her. She helped others. She raised a family. She created a meaningful life. This photograph is no longer just a picture of what she went through. It shows her strength and her refusal to disappear. Rebecca also spoke. She said that Louisa's hand signal had gone unnoticed for 120 years, yet she made it anyway. She trusted that someone in the future would look closely enough to understand. This story was not only about one woman. It reflected the broader reality of how unequal laws and social systems harm black women, and how many endured similar experiences without support. It also showed the incredible strength of those who survived. In the months that followed, thousands of visitors viewed the exhibition. They saw Louisa's signal. They read her words. They learned the truth that had been hidden for more than a century. The photograph finally achieved what Louisa hoped it would. It preserved her story so it would not be erased. Her quiet message was finally heard, and it brought attention to the many others whose experiences had been forgotten.